Hi. Hi, good evening. So I was starting a live over on TikTok, but I just remembered I haven't been on here in a minute. So I thought I'd come on here and see if any of my bookish friends are online. It's about 10:30 Eastern Standard Time. Thought I'd come on here for a little while just to see if anyone is up. If anyone's up, so we could talk books. I haven't posted on my channel in a little bit. I haven't been reading recently. I haven't been reading too much recently. Just had a lot on my mind. There's a lot going on right now that I've been thinking about and mulling over. Um, primary, maybe my primary concern right now is that I'm worried about my mom's health. My mom's in the hospital. And so I've just been thinking about her to the point where I can't read. I just can't focus on too much else. But I thought I could talk about books that I have read. So I have finished about 70 books so far this year, and I average about 100 books or so that I read each year. So I have a lot of books that I could talk about. And for new books, if I haven't read them, some of them I've heard about, and I could definitely chat about my impressions of a book, even if I haven't read them yet. So would love to chat books with you. Let me know what book you're reading now or the book that you have finished most recently. And, let's talk about it. And until you put in your book in the comments, I'll just start with my books. Because, like I said, I have read about 70 books so far this year. And I track them on a spreadsheet. I use an Excel spreadsheet to track my reading. So this is, can I see it? This is what my spreadsheet looks like. My categories on my spreadsheet. I track, of course, the title and the author. And I used to track there's some information that I used to track that I don't anymore. Like I used to track the gender or gender presentation of the author because I wanted to be intentional about reading more women, but I generally gravitate towards books by women authors, so that's not something that I track anymore. So that's a past, but in my current spreadsheet, I track the title, I track the author, I track the date that I finished the book. So I don't necessarily write down when I started the book, but I do note when I finished it. And of course, my rating, I use the Goodreads system. So I track number of stars, whether it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5-star read. I track the genre. So I'm trying to see if I'm reading fiction or nonfiction. And also within fiction, what kind of fiction? Is it novels? Is it graphic novels or so on? A lot of my nonfiction reading is memoir these days, so I track that. I also wanted to keep track of if my nonfiction reading is like more nature based or science based writing. I track that as well. So my genre, I could be pretty specific where that is concerned. I usually write down my page count. I track the year that the book was published because over the years, there have been a few times that I've done a challenge where I want to compare, whether or not I'm reading newer books or older books. There was a challenge one year to track books or to read books over several decades. So like a 10-decade challenge to see if you could read all the decades within a century. So I track publication year for sure. I track the setting because one of the things that I like to keep record of is whether or not I'm reading books from across the world. So I also read a lot of books that are set in the Caribbean or written by authors who are from the Caribbean or have Caribbean background. So that is something that I definitely want to keep track of. This year and last year, I'm also trying to see if I have read books from across the United States. So not all my books being set in New York or California. Trying to see if I can track, if I can if I can read a book from each one of the 50 states. So that's something that I am keeping track of as the year goes on. I also keep a record of whether the books that I read are books that I own or books that come from the library. It's been a goal, like it appears on my reading goals that I want to read more of the books that come from my shelves. as well as I get a lot of books from publishers, books to review. And so I want to make sure that I'm reading those books. But even though that is supposed to be a goal of mine, I still get a lot of the books that I read from the library. And that's just because um, I also always have other goals. So, one of the things that I participate in is the BookTube Prize, where I judge books according to small categories, 6 books at a time. And I'm either reading for fiction or nonfiction category. I have 2 months to read 6 books and to rank them. And a lot of those books I get from the library because they are books from the previous year, books that were published in the previous year, the books that we are judging now for the BookTube Prize. And even though I get a lot of new books, somehow a lot of the books that are assigned to me to judge the prize end up not being books that I own. So I get a lot of those books from the library. I also track whether my books are print or electronic. I mostly read print books. I very rarely read an electronic copy. Sometimes I will defer to reading or looking for an electronic copy if I want to read something like a classic and I don't have my own physical copy. I'll go to like Project Gutenberg so I can read it online for free. My library does have some electronic versions, but somehow the library that I'm currently, well, I'm a part of 3 or 4 different library systems, but the library system where I live, you need an external, like a third party app in order to access their ebooks. And somehow it just doesn't work for me. So I'm also a part of the New York Public Library system, and I do get some of my ebooks from the New York Public Library system. And I love that because I can read the book and not have to worry about actually going back to a New York Public Library branch in order to return a physical copy. So that's where most of my electronic books come from. I do occasionally purchase a Kindle download, but like I said, I prefer reading a physical book. I prefer reading print. So I like to have my books. I like to, as you can tell, I like to have my physical books around. So I will always look for a print book. I'll always look for a print book when I can. Audiobooks, I don't listen to a lot of audio content because I tend to not focus as well. I tend to not be able to keep the words present if I'm just listening to the audio. A few months ago, I got a few audio print combinations for the BookTube Prize, and that was phenomenal. I love having the audio being played while I'm following along on the physical book, and I feel like even if I'm not following along at the same time, that just knowing that the text is there that I can refer to if I need to look up like a word that or a name that I'm hearing that I'm not sure, how to visualize it, I could look it up. I think that helps me. Knowing that I have the physical print to refer to, that helps me to focus. So e-audio or audio in combination with a print, that works. Just audio, not as much. That's not my preferred way to consume media. I grew up listening to the radio, so it's not that I can't follow along with a story that I'm listening to, but I prefer to have a physical book. So those are things that I track on my spreadsheet. I also write down sometimes especially for fiction, I write down the names of characters. Just because over the years, for different challenges, I've tried to see if I have read like a character whose name begins with every letter of the alphabet. Those are just fun things that I used to do to, have fun with my books. That's not a challenge that I'm currently pursuing, but I still, because the tab is still in my spreadsheet, I keep importing it every year. It's still there. I also try to keep a note of whether the book that I'm reading is originally published in English or if it is a translated work. Because there have been times where I've participated in a challenge to read more books that are translated. And, there are a lot of our books, a lot of our popular books, classic books that were translated that I didn't realize until when I started actively looking for translated works. Yeah, so that's something that I keep track of. And if a book has been translated, I like to know who the translator is, because one of my pet peeves that I did not know until, like I said, I became intentional about looking for translated works, was that sometimes the translator's name does not appear on the work, on the printed work, especially does not appear on the cover. It's only, I think, when publishers are intentional about doing it that you see it. But quite often, a translated work does not appear to be translated because the translator's name does not appear anywhere on the front cover, sometimes not even on the flyleaf. So I keep track of it in my spreadsheet. And new in the past couple of years on my spreadsheet, I now write down why I'm reading the book. So if it is a book that the publisher sent me for review, I keep note of that, just so at the end of the year I can see how many books I read that were sent to me by publishers that I might not have picked up otherwise. I also write down if I'm reading the book for a book club or a buddy read and which one of my groups that is. I'm a part of more than one book club. I'm also a part of more than one buddy reading group. So I like to keep track of that. If it's a book that I'm reading because I'm judging the booktube prize, I like to write that down as well. And other things like, little challenges that I'll give myself. Like a few months ago, I wanted to read books by Irish authors. So I will write that down, that the reason I'm picking up this book right now is because of this Irish author challenge. I host a book club, and a big part of the focus on my channels, on my social media platforms where I talk about books, I try to promote including books by Caribbean authors in your TBR. So not that I only and exclusively read books by Caribbean authors. I would never, because I like to read books from all over. I like to read books that represent all kinds of perspectives and backgrounds. But just, my encouragement all the time is just remember the Caribbean writers and try to read books that are written by people from that background or that heritage. So I was saying, because of that, I actively promote selecting books by Caribbean authors. And in doing so, we're also sending messages to the publishers that books by the Caribbean, books that were originally from the Caribbean or written by authors who are from the Caribbean, should be published in mainstream publishing so that they can be more accessible. Because a big part of my selection of a book by a Caribbean author is that I have access to it here. I live in New York City. I live in the United States. So as much as I might want to read a book by a Jamaican author, I'm originally Jamaican, if you couldn't tell, if you didn't know. As much as I would want to read a Jamaican author, if the book is not available to me here in the United States, then I'd have to wait until I go to Jamaica to get the book. And it also means that I wouldn't be able to actively promote it on my social media to other American-based readers, or I wouldn't be able to offer it as a selection from my book club, which mostly has American readers. If the book is not available here, then people can't access it. So part of my process in highlighting and promoting books by Caribbean authors is so that books that were published by Caribbean authors, especially those who are still living in the Caribbean, would also be accessible to readers outside of the Caribbean, because that's how we get our stories told. That's how we get people to become more aware and more appreciative of Caribbean culture. So I host a book club called the Runwright Reads Book Club. My profile name is Runwright Reads. If you are new here, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Hi, Sarah. I see some messages. Oh, thank you so much. I see a message here from Panza de Sancho who says, I've been watching for a while, but I've never commented. I always go to your channel for Caribbean recommendations. Thanks for all your videos. Thank you so much. I am so, so happy to read that. Thank you again. Hi, Sarah. Hi. Welcome. So yeah, I try to review some of the books that I read. I always have good intentions. I always have good intentions that I'm going to review all the Caribbean books that I read. Sometimes I read more than other times. I also host a readathon in June called Caribathon. So if you haven't heard about, if this is your first time on my channel, and you're here because I'm live now, then take a moment and browse some of my videos. We host a readathon in June called Caribathon, where the focus is on reading books by Caribbean authors. And in the past couple of years, we have expanded our recommendation of Caribbean authors to include authors who are not necessarily from the Caribbean themselves, but their parents are from the Caribbean. And so they've been raised with that Caribbean immigrant heritage. And I like to see how that shows up in their books, even if you wouldn't necessarily think about this author as being a Caribbean author. So a perfect example of that is Charmaine Wilkerson. She wrote the book Black Cake, and she also published a book earlier this year called Good Dirt. And both of them are fantastic reads. I read them both. But Black Cake, which was her debut novel, focused on a family where the parents were Jamaican and they had moved to England, and then they moved to the United States, and they had their children in the United States. And so their children were raised as American children, but coming home to Caribbean families when they came home. And so they were raised with that bicultural awareness, even if they maybe didn't quite appreciate their Jamaicanness while they were experiencing it. So I loved seeing how this author, who is not necessarily Jamaican herself, wrote about Jamaican culture and how it influences people who are next to it, who are living with it in their periphery. So I love that book, and it's one of my recommendations for the year, Black Cake, Charmaine Wilkerson. So yeah, I like to promote books by Caribbean authors because I think when you start being intentional about looking for Caribbean authors, you will see that they are in lots of different places in literature. And I love that. I love that for us. So that was just a lot about my reading, how I track my reading and why. So I have an Excel spreadsheet that I update, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it because, glare and all of that, but I just created an Excel spreadsheet several years ago. And so every year I just import it and I change the things that I am tracking as my personal interests change. So at the beginning of this, I was saying that I used to track the gender presentation of the authors. It's not something that I actively track anymore, because the reason that I started tracking it was I wanted to be intentional about making sure that I was reading books by female authors. I wanted to read books by women, but I naturally gravitate towards books by women. There was a time when I felt like I naturally gravitated towards books by men because I was pursuing reading the canon. I wanted to make sure that if there were any gaps in my literature exposure and awareness, that I was filling them in. And so I was looking for recommendations from all over. And a lot of those books were written by men. And so while I started pursuing reading some of those books, I also realized that I wasn't getting everything, that I wasn't filling in all the gaps because I wasn't looking intentionally for books by women. And so there was a whole part of the culture that I wasn't experiencing if I was only reading books by men. So I wanted to be intentional about looking for books by women, but now that just happens naturally, so I don't necessarily track it anymore. just a lot of the books that come my way now are books by women. Like I get books from the publishers to review, and if I looked at the list, and maybe one of the things that I'll do in upcoming days is look at the books that I have received so far this year. Most of them have been women authors, and some of them are books that I have chosen. Um, but yeah, a lot of the books that I read now are by women. So I don't track that anymore. That's what I'm saying. My spreadsheet and the things that are interesting to me to take note of has evolved as I have gotten more mature in my reading. And I'm just more aware of what it is that I'm looking for. So we're here live, we're spending some time together. So if you have a book that you'd like to ask me a question about, or a book that you have been reading or just finished reading that you'd like us to chat about, you could drop that in the comments. Hi, Phil. I see Phil says, I like your book collection behind you. Oh, Phil, this is not even a half. This is not even a half. These are the books that have been shelved, and I'm going to turn this just a little bit. That shelf right there is that shelf right there, and those books that are standing up right there, those are more of an active TBR. Those are books that are more active TBR. Like those are books that have come my way in the last year or so. Most of those are books that have gotten in the last year or so that I need to read for one reason or another. Quite a few of them are books that the publishers have sent me, and I did my promotion, so I fulfilled my obligation, but I still want to read the book myself, so it's there. These books right here and here, those two shelves right there, are books that have won the Booker Prize. And it's one of my ongoing challenges to read all of them. And there's a whole project surrounding that. But I've read maybe about half of them by now. But it's not something that I'm actively working on just because I have so many other reading projects that I need to work on. So I do need to come back and read more of those books. Yeah. But there are lots of books, and this is just books that are on this shelf. There are a few other shelves. There is a stack over there, and there's a huge stack over there that needs to be shelved, and then there's another shelf. One day I'll do a full bookshelves tour. But yeah, I like books. That's why I said I prefer to read a print book, just because I have a lot of them. I have a lot of books, and my books are not necessarily sorted by read and unread. So there's a mix. Like these books, the books right behind me here that are the Booker winners, they are shelved, or they were shelved. Some of them have moved just because as I do things with my shelf, sometimes they get moved. Sometimes I move them just so they can look a little better. But originally they were organized by the year in which they won the Booker Prize. Not necessarily publication year, because there's a little time at the beginning of the Booker history where that was different. So they used to be organized by when they won the Booker. For the most part, it's chronological. So these books, aside from that red one, most of those books in the first, on that side, are the oldest Booker winners, until we get like down here, which has the newest Booker winners that I own. Like right there, this black one right here is Shuggie Bain, which won maybe about 3 years ago. That book right there is not a Booker winner. It's just in there because it's big. It's around the same size as those books, and I didn't have anywhere else to put it. But like Shuggie Bain and Orbital, which is probably not on the shelf because it's somewhere else on another shelf for a different reason. Yeah. There are a lot of books. There are a lot of books, and I'm actively trying to read all of them someday. So thank you so much for asking. I don't know that you asked necessarily about the books, but I just like talking about them. There's a lot on my mind. There's a lot on my mind. So I just wanted to come on here and chat. And talking books is the thing that I'm probably most comfortable talking about, because I could always have a bookish conversation. I could always have a bookish conversation. So if you would like to ask me about a book that I own, a book that I've read, a book that you're reading, we could chat about it. So my current read, one of my current reads, I'm reading two things right now, and I'm not reading either of them actively because I haven't read anything in the past like 3 or 4 days, maybe longer. There have been, I'll just mention it because some of you may not have been here at the beginning. My mom is in hospital, and my mind is just like, I'm just like, I'm just thinking about her. So, I can't, it's hard for me to focus on a book. It's hard for me to think about anything else and be really immersed on that thing or in that thing. So because of that, I haven't been reading. But the book that I did read probably most recently was this one. If you're seeing this, It's Meant for You by Lee Stein. Publishers sent this to me, and I started reading it, and I really wanted to finish it because it's a storyline that I could see myself having lots of thoughts about. It's about influencer culture and what makes an influencer, and what do we give up in order to be what we consider to be influential. So the main character in this book is a young woman. She's 24, 25, and there's some stuff happening in her personal life. So she needs a place to live, and so she decides to sign up to join this hype house, which is where a lot of other young people who want to make it big on social media have been staying, and just focusing on building their platforms, building their following, doing things that they wouldn't necessarily do on a regular, normal basis, just so that they can go viral or build their following, because those aren't always the same thing. And so she's been hired, or she's been invited to join the house, not necessarily as a content creator herself, but more to work with the content creators and give them feedback on how they can build their platforms. And I find that to be really interesting, just to see how the influencer culture is going to be represented. Because, I think some of us, like myself, when I joined YouTube, because YouTube was my first, what I consider to be influencer platform. And I don't want to not be humble about this, but I consider myself to be a book influencer, right? Right? You agree? Like and share, if you agree. Funny. So yeah. What I was saying, some of us thought that, or it used to be that YouTube was just about sharing your real life. Like, do you remember when people would make the really grainy videos from their bedrooms, just talking about their lives? That's what YouTube started off being, right? Where we made personal videos, where the things that we were recording was our real life. Those were video logs. Back then, vlogs, video logs were us creators. We weren't creating, we were just documenting our real life. Social media has moved away from documenting your real life to creating content. So now we have content creators who set out to do things, to make videos about, so that they can get likes, so they can get follows, so they can make a living from the content they create. So they're making videos instead of recording things that are actually happening to them. So that's the change in influencer culture. It's moved away from what you're really doing to what you can make people believe that you're doing. And so that big shift, it's a big shift. That's a paradigm shift. And for those of us who were part of the original YouTube group of YouTubers, it's been a big change. It's been a big shift. And so sometimes it feels like there's still times, there's still days when I'd want to make a video, but I feel like I don't have a book to talk to you about. Like, it's one of the reasons that I didn't make a lot of videos in the summer, because I wasn't reading as much. I was spending more time with my family. Like, my daughter is home from school, and I wasn't reading as much. And I feel like I can't make videos if I don't have a book to talk to you about. Content creators don't care about that. Content creators just want to make interesting videos about the books. It doesn't matter whether you've read the book or not. And so it's hard for me, and I think people like me who still remember the original days of YouTube, it can be hard for us to make that adjustment to how we do YouTube. It may be hard for us to make that adjustment with how we make content on whatever platform. But the demand is now for the content creation. So if you want to survive on this or any other platform, you have to adjust. You have to give the people what the people want. So I think there's still a market or a demand for the original kind of content, but we also have to produce the other thing if we want to attract new viewers, because the people who used to watch us 10 years ago are probably not all still following us. So if we want to gain new followers, we have to give the new followers what they're expecting based on comparing us with other creators, comparing documentarians with creators. So anyway, all of that to say, I'm really interested in the book. I'm really interested to see where it goes, but I just haven't been able to return to it. Just haven't been able to immerse in a book recently. The other book that I started reading, I'm buddy reading Plum Bun by Jessie Redmond Fawcett, who is a Black woman author from the early 1900s. And I think she was active at the period of the Harlem Renaissance, if I'm not mistaken. And reading this book about a family where the mother was a very light-skinned Black woman, and the husband was a darker-skinned Black man. And this woman, not that she necessarily set out to do it always, but she was frequently mistaken for being white, and so she was able to, quote unquote, pass. And as things would turn out, they had two children between them, and one child looked like the mother and had the mother's complexion and appearance, and the other child had the father's aspect, appearance, complexion. So mother and one daughter passed, and father and one daughter could not. And so we're reading about the different experiences between the parents when the mother is passing versus the different experience between the sisters when one is passing and one is not, because she cannot, also because she would not, even if she could, I guess. So very interesting story. I've read several books about passing, not limited to, but probably most prominent in my mind, books that include Black people in the early 1900s, who were able, or who passed, who pretended to be white so that they would have access to the privileges afforded to white people during that time. Books like The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett, which I think was excellent because Britt Bennett explored separation of identity or difference or change or evolution of identity in lots of different ways. I thought that book was excellent. So if you haven't yet read it, that is my recommendation. Probably my first recommendation from this video, from this live, is The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. I haven't read anything else by her. Have I? I didn't read her debut, which was The Mothers. I still haven't read that. But yeah, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett is excellent. There are some there's some themes in the book that were unexpected, but I think the way she talks about the differences and the evolution of identity, I thought was just top tier. Well done. So, The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Other books that include people, Black people, allowing themselves to be considered to be white, to get access to white privilege, include Passing by Nella Larson, which definitely talked about that. There's also a character in James by Percival Everett, which highlights some of the danger in passing. So if you haven't read that, no, James by Percival Everett is one of my best recommendations, one of my best reads so far this year. So consider that a recommendation as well, as is Passing by Nella Larson. Although I think Passing as a novel is probably for a more specialized reader, because it is also from that period in the early to mid 1900s. And if you're not necessarily a big fan of books set in that time period, this might not be the book for you. So if you take one recommendation from all of that, it would be James by Percival Everett. Although I do recommend reading Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, reading it before you read James. James is a standalone book. It can be read by itself, but I think reading The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn before gives you a better appreciation of why Percival Everett needed to write James. He needed to write James. Like, James needed to be written. It needed to be written. And Adventures of Huckleberry Finn is such a popular book. It is recommended to so many people. A lot of students, especially students in America, read that book. It's a part of the literary canon. It's a big part of recommendations in schools. And so a lot of people have read Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. But James by Percival Everett needs to be read. It needed to be written. It's a response, but it's not just a response. There's just so much about that book. So if you take one recommendation from this live, it would be to read James by Percival Everett if you haven't already. If you have already, then read The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. Those are the two recommendations that I have spoken about thus far. Now, because I must talk about Caribbean books, I must give Caribbean recommendations. Let's chat about that, just in case you need to go to bed soon, because I do too. So like I said, I have read about 70 books this year. I have read so the Runwright Reads Book Club is supposed to read a Caribbean book every month. And then there are also some books that I read for the Caribathon. I was just about to mispronounce my own readathon. The Caribathon happens in the middle of June. The focus is on reading books by Caribbean authors. And one of my top recommendations from Caribathon was the Caribathon group read, which was Passion Tide by Monique Roffey. Passion Tide by Monique Roffey. I don't have a physical copy of that book, but it was phenomenal. It talked about so many things, so many different topics were addressed. And so while it focused on an issue that is significant and relevant in the Caribbean, it's also an issue that affects women, and so women across the world. And that is violence against women, and how frequently women who have been victimized get blamed and shamed because they have been victimized. So it was about violence and abuse suffered by women because they are women. Passion Tide by Monique Rafi was, the author did something really interesting because she showed the universality of the problem by setting a book in the Caribbean, but having someone from outside be the main character. So the main character, or the person who experiences the violence, is not a Caribbean native, but she also shows the ties that they have to the Caribbean. And it was just so well done, so well drawn. So I did a review, well, we did discussions of Passion Tide. So if you want to hear more about Passion Tide, I'd recommend that you just browse through my channel. Search Passion Tide by Monique Rafi, MoniqueRoffey is her last name. And the book title is Passion Tide, one word, Passiontide. Passion Tide by Monique Rafi. And in the book, we also explore a lot about religion and how people see religion and use religion as a vehicle sometimes to carry their own thoughts, beliefs, biases, prejudices. We discussed politics in a lot of ways, and how politics is not just about people who are elected officials, people who have sway and influence, people who are associated with political leaders, and how those people who would be their advisors can also sway them. There's a lot about Passion Tide. I could talk about it for days. So during Caribbean, we did a group read where I posted a short video every day discussing a few sections of the book. And that was really successful, I think, because there were a lot of people who probably would have, I don't know, maybe not read the book as quite on the same pace, but having a place to discuss the book, I thought was helpful for me as well as for other people who gave some feedback. At the end of the group read, we also did a discussion with my co-host, who is Peter from Comfy Cozy Up. And so we had a live show on her channel. So if you want to hear us discuss Passion Tide by Monique Rafi, there is a long video, it's maybe an hour and a half, on Peter's channel. Her channel is Comfy Cozy Up. So you can look up Peter's channel, search Comfy Cozy Up Passion Tide, and her live discussion should come up. And in that live, she and I are discussing Passion Tide and responding to viewers' questions or comments about the book. So that was wonderful. Caribbean, if you are just joining us, Caribbean is the readathon that we host in June. We've been hosting it now for 6 years. Every June we spend a little time, sometimes a week. Then we were going for 10 days, and this time, as well as last time, I think we did 2 full weeks, and it was wonderful. It's a time to read Caribbean books, but also think about other ways to celebrate Caribbean culture and Caribbean literature, how to look for Caribbean influences in other places, and I love it. So aside from that, I host a book club. Did I mention that? I think so. The book club is called the Runwright Reads Book Club. It is an open book club, so if you are interested in joining us, you can. This month we had other plans, but this month we've been reading Love Forms by Claire Adams, which is a brand new release, and it has been longlisted for the Booker Prize. Remember Booker, my challenge to read the Booker winners. So here's hoping that Claire Adams wins the Booker, so that by reading that book, I'll be able to add another book, another notch in my Booker winner belt. But even separate and apart from that, Claire Adam is a Trinidadian author, and I loved her debut novel, which was, I think it was her debut, called Golden Child, which explored a little bit about identity in families and in relationships, and how sometimes we distinguish, well, we observe differences between two things that would probably seem similar to other people, and how we relate differently to those things. So the vehicle that she used for that book was twins in a family, and the twins are identical in appearance, but they have something that makes them different, and how the other people in their lives treat them based on those things that are different. So whereas the two people who would seem identical and seem like they should receive the same treatment, how different people treat them, how different they're valued, and eventually, how that's manifested. Don't want to give it away. I mean, the book is several years old, but I'm very concerned about spoiling experiences for other people. So yeah, Golden Child by Claire Adam was a fantastic read. I loved it. I've read it a few times. And so when I heard that she had a new book out, I was very excited. So I got Love Forms, and it was a gift from the publisher, which was an added bonus. And then hearing that it had been longlisted for the Booker Prize, I was like, okay, give me another reason to read this book. So Love Form is the book that we are reading for the Runwright Reads book club right now. We should have read it in August, but like I said, I didn't read much. I didn't read much in the past few weeks, but my plan is to read it. My plan is to finish reading it soon. I started, but I didn't get very far. So I'm going to have to restart that, and we're going to be talking about it next weekend. So I need to finish that. So if you're interested in reading Caribbean books, if you're interested in reading more books by authors from the Caribbean or authors who have Caribbean heritage or background, then you might want to join me. I'm on Instagram, same channel name. What's my name on here? My name on here is Runwright Reads. On Instagram, it's Karen_Runwright Reads. You can look me up on Instagram. If you're on the gram, send me a message over there that you want to join the book club, and we have a group on Instagram that you can join, and we could talk about the book. I will also, after our group discussion, hopefully post a review here on YouTube, so it will be accessible to everyone, regardless of whether you have a YouTube account or not. I think my profile is public, so you can watch my videos even if you don't have a login on YouTube. So a discussion of Love Forms by Claire Adam should be coming soon on the channel. Coming soon, sometime after September 14th. Yeah, so those are some of the Caribbean books that I've been thinking about and talking about. Earlier, I talked about Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson, which Charmaine Wilkerson is not from the Caribbean, but she has Caribbean background. She spent some time in Jamaica as a child, and you can definitely see some of the Jamaican influence in how she represents her characters. People who were born in America but with Caribbean surroundings. So people who were from the Caribbean in their family, maybe in their school, that kind of thing. So I love that. I love seeing the Caribbean influence in books that were written by authors who are not from the Caribbean themselves, but were raised by Caribbean immigrants. One of my favorite authors like that is Andrea Levy. Andrea Levy is a British author. Her mother, I think it's her mother who's Jamaican. Her maternal ancestry is Jamaican. And she's written some books that make you think that she is Jamaican herself. One of my favorite books from her is Small Island. Another recommendation for you if you're looking for more Caribbean recommendations. Small Island by Andrea Levy. And what makes that book so interesting to me is that it has two settings. It's set in Jamaica, but it also has a very strong British setting. And because the book is just such a strong product, both settings are equally important to the book. The characters who are Jamaican are just as important, but no more important than the characters who are British. And I love seeing the interaction between them, the people from very different backgrounds, very different upbringings, how they influence each other. The very hilarious way that they try to maintain their identity, even faced with the knowledge that to uphold their preconceived notions is destructive. They just can't let them go because it's just such a strong part of who they are. And that goes for both the British characters and the Jamaican characters. So I love it. Andrea Levy, she also wrote this book called Long Song, which focuses more on Jamaican identity, but earlier Jamaican identity. So not the 1900s, but much earlier, or early 1900s, I think. I don't remember. I don't remember the exact setting. But yeah. So I love seeing how authors who are not necessarily raised in the Caribbean represent their Caribbean exposure because they grew up with their parents' stories and their parents' language and their parents' cultural identity in their homes. I love it. Another author who you don't necessarily think about as Caribbean, but has strong Caribbean roots, is Zadie Smith. Zadie Smith wrote White Teeth. And that's one of the books that we read for the book club last year, because we were alternating books by authors who were born in the Caribbean themselves and the children of Caribbean immigrants. And so we read a few books by Zadie Smith. Well, we read that book by Zadie Smith for the book club. I also read a couple of other things from her. Yeah. Zadie Smith also did that really interesting thing where she had the Jamaican mother as a character in her book, and just seeing how she faces off with her English husband and how much she influences her British children with her own upbringing. Because one of the things that I just find so interesting to read about is these Caribbean immigrants trying to live in their new home country as though they're still living in their original Caribbean countries, and it's just not possible. It's just not possible. It's something that I had to find out for myself as someone who immigrated from another country. Finding out that you cannot live here like you lived there. You can't pretend that you live there when you live here. Things are different. Your children are going to be different. Your children are going to be different because they are not Caribbean children. They are the children of the country that you live in now. Exposed to your background, but not living your background. And it's good. It's good. It's great. That's why, as part of the reason that we, go to these other countries. So those are books that I have read and talked about. I see some messages in the chat, but unfortunately I have not. There are a couple of messages in another language and I can't read and don't think I can translate on here. If someone else can translate them, that would be great. But thank you, Panza, for your kind words. Jamaican history book recommendations. Okay. I will make a video. I'll make a video, make a short in a couple of days, hopefully, where I share some nonfiction recommendations, maybe Caribbean history more so than just Jamaican. Right now, I don't have a book in mind. I don't have a physical book that I own that is Jamaican history. But I have a few books that I could think about that are Caribbean history. Like I have a book about Cuba and a book that I wanted to read in June about Haitian history that I didn't get to yet, but I want to. So I'll make a video. I'll make a short in a few days. Give me a couple of days to get my hands on the books, and I'll try to share that recommendation with you. But I don't have a title that comes to mind right now. So I don't know if you were here earlier when I was saying that a lot of the books that I read a lot of the books by Caribbean authors or books about the Caribbean that I read are books that I have gotten here in the United States. When I moved here from Jamaica, I didn't bring any of my books that I had with me. I brought a couple of books, but not Caribbean books. I know that's a different story for another time. I will have, like I said, I'll have to think about that. But thank you so much for the question, because now you've given me a project to work on. Any other questions you have about bookish content that you'd like me to make, please feel free to send your suggestions. And thank you so much for what you say about my mom. Yes, so just in case you weren't here at the beginning, I was just sharing that my mom has not been well for a few days. She's been in hospital for about 2 weeks now, and she's having some health challenges, and we're just hoping for the best. We're hoping that she will recover completely and quickly. But while she is not well, it's just very difficult for me to focus on anything else, really. It's just so hard for me to read, hard for me to immerse in a book, which is why I haven't been reading too much recently. But if I've read a book in the past, you could talk to me about it. Should I tell you the books that I have read so far this year? Is that boring? I hope not. Okay, I'm gonna give you a list. And if I mention a book that I read this year that you'd like to talk to me about, feel free to leave that in the chat. So my book that I start the year with every year for the past couple of years now, I read 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff. It is a short book. It is a little under 100 pages. It's 97 pages, and it's epistolary. It is completely epistolary. It is an exchange between an American woman who's an author and people in and around a bookshop in England. The English bookstore, their address is 84 Charing Cross Road. And so that's where the title of the book comes from. The book starts off with an exchange between, a letter that this American author sends to this bookseller, like a used bookseller, rare books or antiquarian books or something. They deal in books. They deal in used books. And so she sends a letter across the water in the early to mid 1900s. It's around the time of the war, and she sends a letter to them asking them to source a book for her and send her the book and tell her how much she owes them for it. And when they send back the invoice, She replies to their mail, and so it becomes this correspondence that starts between specifically one bookseller and a book lover, and then it expands to other people around that. And it's a beautiful read. It's a beautiful read. And I didn't come up with this idea to start the year reading this book by myself. This idea came from a bookish creator called Hardcover Hearts. Her name is Sarah, and her channel name here on YouTube is Hardcover Hearts. She's also active on Instagram. I'm not sure about her other platforms or what other platforms she's on, but I follow her here on YouTube as well as on Instagram. And she's the one who first suggested reading this book as the first book of the year. It's perfect because it's so short. You can read it in one day. And if you are someone who tracks your reading and you want to make sure that you are starting the year strong, you want to complete a book on the first day of the year, this is a great book to read. It is about 97 pages and it is purely epistolary. So the letters are short. Letters are short. So it's less than 97 pages of reading is what I'm saying. So it's also just like a very heartwarming book because it shows people how intimacy and relationships build over years. The book itself, the letters span several years and several relationships being built, and it's just beautiful to read. And because it is based in a bookstore, between a bookseller or between booksellers and book lovers, then it's just very literary. There's a lot of literary content, a lot of books are mentioned, there's a lot of talk about books and why books are important and the things that we do for books. So if you're a huge reader, if you love books, if you are book motivated like I am, and a lot of us are, then it's a book to just really, really enjoy. And because it's also set during a war, or there's a period of the book that covers or spans a war experience, it also reminds you that while it feels like the world is at war, that there are still beautiful things happening. And so it's just such a special read. So that's the first book that I read in the year, and it's my first book that I have read in a couple of years. Should I read something different as my first book of the year? Like, I have thought about whether or not I should be reading like a book that furthers another one of my reading intentions. Like, should my first book of the year be a Caribbean book? Should my first book of the year be, a book that reflects something else that I want to focus on? Maybe. But because those are other things that I'm tracking, then I'm pretty sure that I'll focus on those other things during the year. So I don't feel like I'm off brand to read this book instead of like a Caribbean book at the beginning of the year. It's just such a beautiful way to start the year. So 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff is my number one, my first read of the year. It's always a 5-star. Every time I read it, I love it. I love it even more. So that's my first book, has been my first book of the year for a couple of years now. Other books that I read this year. So I'm going to give you a list, and if you want to stop me, if you want to talk about... Oh, thank you so much, Panza. I appreciate your being here. You said Panza says loves 84 Charing Cross Road, book and film. There's a film? I must look that up. I think I knew that there was a film adaptation, but I've never seen it. I don't often watch adaptations of books that I love, but now that you've mentioned it, I will look. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining. I will try to do this more often. I really enjoy coming on. Really enjoy coming on and sharing and seeing new people and meeting having some chats. So thank you so much. Have a great night. I appreciate your being here. I understand not everyone can stay up all night. So let's just keep this going. Other books that I have read, maybe I won't tell you all the books, but I'll tell you some of them. I read this book called The Paris Novel by Ruth Riechel. This was my first time reading anything from her. I think I don't I don't remember if she's written other novels, but I know she's a huge nonfiction author. So when I mentioned that I was reading this book to one of my friends who reads almost exclusively nonfiction, she was very familiar with the title, with the author's name, because she had read some of her like food writing. What I loved about this book, The Paris Novel, was how well the author talked about what I consider to be Parisian experiences, food, art, fashion, discussion about how other people, people from outside of France are viewed. A little bit of xenophobia, a little of that. So I loved it. I love the Paris Novel. The author, I could tell that she was a food author, that she was a food writer, because her descriptions of food and how the main character interacted with food and the experiences that she built based on culinary, like shared culinary delights, was like the food writing was tantalizing in this novel. And it wasn't a book about food. It was just a book about, it's like a coming of age, if you can come of age as an adult. And I loved it. I loved it also because it talked about just someone leaving home and becoming more of themselves in a new space, because that's something that I felt happened to me when I moved away from home. Moving away from home can be complex, can be complicated. You're moving away from what you know and love, but it also forces you to become more intentional about who you want to be, how you want to represent yourself in this new space to these new people that you're going to be meeting. So love that, The Paris Novel by Ruth Riechel. And that was another 5 stars. So my first 4 books that I read this year were 5 star for different reasons. So I told you 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Have, 5 star, because it's bookish, it's literary, it's feel good, it is intimate, delightful. The Paris Novel by Ruth Riechel, another 5 star, because of all the ways that the author represented what I consider to be Parisian experiences. Were all mentioned, and they were all they were described and represented with such love. Like, you could tell that the author loved all the things that she was writing about. I loved it. The way she talks about food, the way she talked about fashion, the way she talked about art, the way she talked about relationships, the way she talked about travel, the way she talked about writing, literature, did I mention literature? The bookstores, just all of it. It was just delightful. The next book that I read was a nature book, World of Wonders by Amy Nezuko Matatil, I think is how her name is pronounced. That was nonfiction nature writing, where we had a woman who was an author in other respects, writing about how her appreciation of nature drives her to notice things depending on where she is. And so she talks about her own migration pattern, like where she grew up, where she has lived, and where she lives now, and aspects of nature that have just kind of grounded where she is at any one point. And I love that. It was just so delightful. Another short book was less than 200 pages. And the book itself was just very small in size. So it doesn't feel like it's 165 pages, didn't feel like 165 pages. Felt like about 100. So I love that. And then my next book was another nonfiction book. This was more self-help slash memoir. And this was Tidy Up Your Life by Tyler Moore, who has a channel. I think he's on Instagram. He's called Tidy Dad. And he is a heterosexual man in a relationship. He has a wife. He has, I think, 2 daughters and 4 people living in a very small apartment in New York City. And he talked about how he became responsible for a lot of the household management, which I mention his family situation because sometimes that's not what we think, or that's not what we see, where a man is married to a woman, job outside of the home. You don't see him, or you don't expect, and I'm not saying that that's right, I'm just saying that's probably what I see most often. You don't necessarily see him that involved in household tasks, especially to the point where he's managing the household in a physical way. And so I was just very interested to hear that not just that he manages it, but that he has an entire social media and social platform built around being the man who is responsible for keeping his house in a certain way, in that, within that identity. There are men that I have seen on TikTok or on Instagram, not so much on YouTube, because I think with YouTube, I haven't met any of those on YouTube, but more on the short form content platforms, TikTok and Instagram. Like, I've seen reels with men who are stay-at-home dads, and so they do a lot of the household management because they are stay-at-home dads. But in a lot of places, when you hear about a man who has a job that takes him outside of the home every day, that either the household management falls to the wife or to someone who is contracted to perform those tasks. So either the wife or a housekeeper, or generally a housekeeper or a cleaner or something, would be responsible for those things. Generally, you hear about if a man works outside of the home, he doesn't take care of the physical management of the home. Plumbing, electrician, repairing, putting up pictures on the wall, yes. Cleaning the house, organizing spaces, figuring out how to declutter his closet so that he can use a very small space, no. So I was just very impressed by that. And I wanted to read the book. And so the publishers gave me an opportunity to read the book, and I read it. I read it in like a day. I truly love that book. There were so many things that he said in that book. And I'm talking about Tyler Moore's book, Tidy Up Your Life, which stood out to me because the man who wrote the book is a man in a relationship with his wife. They live in a New York City apartment with their 2 daughters, and he has a job outside of the home. He's a teacher outside of the home, and yet he's also the person, his wife also works outside of the home, but he's the person who is responsible for the household management. Day-to-day cleaning and tidying and organizing spaces is his responsibility. And that just stood out to me because, not that it is right, but I see that, not that this thing is right, but I think in more of what I have seen, and so therefore come to expect, is that if a man is doing those things, it is because he's a stay-at-home dad. But if he has a job that takes him outside of the home, that he does not He's not necessarily the principal person. Yes, he may help. He may partner with his spouse to perform those tasks. But to hear that he is primarily responsible for that, I don't hear that very often, especially in media. So I was just very impressed by that. And so the book was also fantastic. I think he had like a lot of resources and guidance for someone, anyone, male or female, depending, no matter what your background, just ways to more maximize your space, tidy up your life. And he talks about physical life, physical space, but also other places, like he talked about our digital clutter and how how that impacts us and what we should do to just kind of tidy things up so we don't have to deal with all that clutter all the time. And that resonates with me, but it's something that I have an issue with managing, is digital clutter, because I like to hold on to stuff, and sometimes out of sight is out of mind. So I forget that things are there because I'm not seeing it actively, but it still needs to be dealt with. So prime example of that is something I'm dealing with right now, which is my Yahoo inbox. Yes, I still use Yahoo, my email. I still use Yahoo as my principal email. I have Gmail accounts, but my Yahoo was my first email. And I guess you'd say, grow up, Karen, move on. My Yahoo is still the mailbox that people have. Still the mailbox that people have. So I could have things sent to me, but I can't forward them if I can't access my account. So what's happened now is Yahoo has sent this notice that the number of emails that I have, or the space that my emails are occupying, is over the limit that they have allotted to me for free storage. So right now I have 23 gigabytes of emails, or email. I'm using 23 gigabytes of email storage, and I can only use up to 20 gigs for free. So sometime before the middle of September, I need to clean up 3 gigs of email storage. Otherwise, after that date, I won't be able to get my Yahoo emails anymore. So unless I clean it up, I won't be able to get new emails. So I won't be able to have them forwarded to another email address anyway. So even if I said I'm going to move to another email address and actually use my Gmail account, if I'm not getting things from my Yahoo, then I just would not be able to. I wouldn't be able to have them forwarded to me, right? Something on my lips, sorry. So I need to get that cleaned up. So it's something I'm working on. And if I had been working on it actively over some time, then it wouldn't be such an issue now. But we're at the point where we have about 2 weeks to get that cleared up. So what I've been doing is I've just been going through my inbox and deleting stuff. I have a lot of unread emails. So there was a time, especially at points where I was using another inbox, another email address, like when I was in college and using my college email, my .edu email. The emails would just pile up. I would just see them. You open up your inbox, you see that the emails are there, but you don't do anything to them. You don't read them because they're not urgent. You just leave them there. There were years where those were just accumulating. And now, even though I'm actively dealing with the emails when they come in, I still have that backlog of a couple of years worth of emails that I just need to delete. So what one person, I shared this on another platform, I shared this on TikTok, And what someone else told me that they did was they went in and just selected all their unread messages and deleted them. And I don't remember if she said that that worked. Because sometimes it's not those emails that are like taking up all the storage. It's all the other things. So I used to use my email account as storage, right? You have a file, a backup, something to back up. I email it to myself. So I also have some of those. I have a lot of messages from myself. I have a lot of messages that I've sent myself that are also still in storage that need to be dealt with. So even when the physical clutter is dealt with, there's still digital clutter that needs to be managed. And so in this book, Tyler Moore talks about, in the book Tidy Up Your Life, Tyler Moore talks about other spaces that we need to declutter. Not just our physical space, our digital space, our relationships, our mental clutter, things that we are focusing on and thinking about that because we're procrastinating, things that if we just dealt with, we wouldn't have to think about them so much anymore. Those are all spaces that I could improve. Those are all places that I could improve. So yeah, those are some of my first books that I read this year that I consider to be 5 stars, most of them. Now, it's interesting because I talk about promoting Caribbean books. The first book that I read that I consider a Caribbean book broke my 5-star streak. It was a 4-star. So I had a 5-star, a 5-star, a 5-star, a 5-star. I had 4 5-star reads, followed by a 4-star read, followed by 3 more 5-star reads. So in 8 books, only one was a 4-star, and it was a book by a Caribbean author. And I felt really bad about that, but it is what it is. So I'm not going to mention it unless you ask me. I'm not going to mention it. So those are my first few books. So I think we'll come on here tomorrow and talk a little bit more about the books that I have read. It is a little past my bedtime, so thank you so much for hanging out with me. Thank you so much for coming on and listening to me yap about my bookshelf and about my book tracking, my book habits, and a few of the books that I've started reading. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining. I will try to do more of these. I'll try to do more of these in the upcoming days as I work on preparing some content that will actually go up on the channel and stay on the channel. I need to make some discussion videos where I talk about some of the things that I've been reading and why, whether I like them or not, and reasons behind those opinions. So more videos, more content coming soon. But for now, thank you so much for hanging out with me. Like I said, I came on here because I needed to just kind of clear my mind, and coming on here and talking with you guys has definitely helped me relax a little bit. I'm not going to say that I feel better because the issue that I have been just like hyper focused on is still there. But it helps to have you guys be here and spend some time together. So thank you so much for joining. Thank you for supporting my live, and I will be back on here sometime soon. I don't know that I'll be able to schedule it in advance. If I can, then I will. But even if I don't, you'll see the notifications. So if you haven't already, subscribe to my channel, turn on your notifications so you'll know when I go live. You'll get notified and you can join me and we'll chat. Thank you so much for being here. Leave in the comments. I'm not sure if I will save this as a video that you can watch later. But if it is, just in case you made it thus far in watch back, then leave a comment about the book that you'd like me to discuss. in next time in our next live. So thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful night, and I'll talk with you soon. Okay, good night. Bye. Happy reading. Thank you so much for coming on. We are just about to sign off. We're going to bed. It is 11:56 here in New York City, Eastern Standard Time. We've been on here talking about books, so thank you so much for joining. And if you're interested in watching the watch back, it will probably be on my channel. If you're seeing this, it's because it's posted to my channel. So we were on here for about an hour and 20 minutes talking about books. We talked about book tracking, book habits, first book of the year, a few 5-star reads, talked about some of my first books that I read this year and why they were 5 stars, and also some of the characteristics that I look for in books. I read and promote a lot of Caribbean literature, but I don't just read books by Caribbean authors. I try to include that. I try to be intentional about choosing books by Caribbean authors because I'm from the Caribbean myself. But I also want to use my platform, use my influence in whatever way I can to just promote Caribbean authors being able to get their books published and distributed here in the United States and for a wider market, because we do want our stories to be shared with the world. We want people to know where we're coming from and what we're about and how we are different or the same from readers from anywhere else. So I use my platform to promote books by Caribbean authors, and so I talk Caribbean books sometimes, but I don't just read Caribbean books because my interests are varied. I would love to read a book and therefore virtually visit every country in the world. I'd love to physically visit more countries, but until then, I'd like to read about them. So I don't just limit myself to books from any one place or one region, but I do want to be intentional, like I said, about promoting books by Caribbean authors. So I have a book club called the Runwright Reads Book Club. If you're interested in hearing a little bit more about that, there should be a video on here where I talk about the book club, usually at the beginning of any review about any of the Runwright Reads book selections. Those videos are tagged book club discussion, so you can go check out those books, check out those review videos, and you can hear a little bit more about the book club. Or you can find me on TikTok or on Instagram where I talk about the books. I don't think I have a video tagged, like I don't think I have a video pinned on either of those profiles that specifically deals with the book club. But if you follow me on Instagram, you send me a message, or leave a comment on one of my posts, then I could add you to our group where we read and discuss Caribbean books. Our book that we are discussing next is Love Forms by Claire Adam, who is a Trinidadian author. And this book is a high profile book right now because it's been longlisted for the Booker Prize. So yeah, those are just some of the things that we were talking about tonight. So thank you so much for being on here. Getting ready to sign off, but we've been on here talking books and book recommendations. I shared some book recommendations. So if you're just joining and you want to hear some of the books that I recommended tonight, I talked about 84 Charing Cross Road by Helen Hanff, which is a book lover's delight, a short book, very easy to get into, epistolary fiction. No, it's not fiction, an epistolary account of a relationship. We talked about The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett and James by Percival Everett. All of those are recommendations from this year. Well, no, The Vanishing Half I did not read this year, but it is about the topic of passing, which I mentioned because we were talking about Plum Bun by Jessie Redman Fawcett, which is one of my current reads. And other books that we recommended tonight, I guess all of the 5-star books that I said that I read at the beginning of this year, including the Paris novel by Ruth Richel and Tidy Up Your Life by Tyler Moore, aka Tidy Dad on Instagram. The Service Berry by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I don't think I mentioned that earlier, but that was an early read this year as well. Another 5-star book about nature and how nature observations make our lives better, just enhance our perspective about other things, like being aware of nature and being aware of nature and our responsibility to nature just makes us better citizens of the world. And Robin Wall Kimmerer, who's a Native American author, she talked about that very well in her book, The Service Berry. I also read a book called Wonder of Wonders by Amy Nizuka Mathathil. Another nature book. So those are some of my 5-star reads. Yeah. Another book that I rated 5 stars, I didn't mention earlier, was The Bookshop by Evan Friss. It talks about the history of bookshops in the United States. And fantastic read. I read that because it was nominated, well, it was on my list for the BookTube Prize, one of the earlier categories that I judged. So I haven't mentioned it yet in this video, but just looking at my spreadsheet now, I saw it. So yeah, all of those are recommendations. So I will make a video, maybe I'll make a short here tomorrow, just listing some of those books that I recommended. So if you want to list, you can see it there. Otherwise, check out my channel, browse my channel if you want Caribbean book recommendations. I have lots of videos where I reviewed Caribbean books. I also occasionally do single book review videos for other books that I have read. On Instagram, I quite often introduce books. I don't always post reviews on my Instagram. But yeah, another book that we talked about a lot this year was the group read for Caribbeathon, which was Passion Tide by Monique Roffey. She is the author of The Mermaid of Black Conch and The White Woman on the Green Bicycle, which I haven't yet read, but I've heard, well, I really love The Mermaid of Black Conch. And this one, Passion Tide, was wonderful. It was wonderfully done. Talked about violence against women, not just domestic violence, but also including domestic violence, but violence and abuse suffered by women just because they are women. So why women are mistreated sometimes just because of who they are. And so we did a lot of talking about that during Caribbeathon, which was in June. That's the readathon where we focus on books by Caribbean authors. And we had a full hour and a half, I think, discussion of the book. And we talked about that on my co-host's channel. So my co-host for the readathon is Comfy Cozy Up. So you can also go check out her channel and look for that live discussion where we talked about the book. We talked about the book from our personal experience reading the book, as well as we took questions from other people who participated in the group read. And so we had a very, very, very lively, passionate discussion about Passion Tide by Monique Roffey. So that was another 5-star. It wasn't a perfect book, but I thought the way the author treated some of the themes and the topics and how she left some parts of the book open-ended, just like real life, where sometimes you feel like you need closure for something and it's just not available. It's a really, really good read. So yeah, those are some of the books that we talked about in this live. And so thank you so much for being here. We're gonna sign off. I will try to post a list of some of the recommendations that I shared tonight in an upcoming short. So if you aren't already subscribed to the channel, subscribe, turn on your notifications so you'll know when I post those videos, and you can come back and get those recommendations in a list if you like. So Thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful night and a beautiful day ahead. And I'll see you in the next one. Have a good night. Thank you so much for being here. If you haven't already liked the video, please like it. Give it a thumbs up so it gets promoted to other people. And, we could keep doing this. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for listening to me talk books. And we'll come back with another one sometime soon. Okay. Have a great night. Bye.